Kemal treated them all with condescension. He spoke to them as if they were boys in a class and he their teacher. On one occasion, some of them, in the Café Nogno, were talking of Kemal as a patriot. Mustafa Kemal interrupted them with a sneer and a homily on true greatness. Next morning, meeting Kemal in the train as they went to their offices together, he told him what he thought of him as a popularity seeker, and repeated ad nauseam his homily on greatness, which was full of platitudes. His brother officers disliked him as a self-opinionated, sneering fellow. His criticisms were always salty and bitter, with no humor to sweeten them. The Jews mistrusted him. He was never initiated into the higher degrees of the Freemason's craft. He was kept out of the inner circle of the committee. At home he was equally difficult. Zubaida was the only person whose open criticism he would accept. But even with her, if she touched his pride, he became frigid and reserved. He would allow no one, not even Zubaida, to interfere with his actions. On one occasion he had brought several of his fellow conspirators to the house. The servants overheard their conversation and told Zubaida. She crept up to Mustafa Kemal's room and listened at the keyhole. When they were gone she objected strongly. Mustafa Kemal tried to reason with her, but the two could not agree at all. She belonged to the older generation with clear-cut beliefs and steadfast loyalties. He to the younger generation which believed in little and respected nothing. Both grew irritated. Eventually Zubaida agreed to help her son. He was the head of the house, knew the world, and perhaps he might have some right on his side. In reality she was sure he was wrong, but was afraid he would leave home. Against her own judgment she helped him, but, woman-like, she continually complained, warning him that it was folly to plot against both the Sultan and religion. This disagreement decided Mustafa Kemal. The restraints of home life galled him. The domestic ties, the chatter of relatives, the everlasting prying of the women, the inevitable repressions irritated him. He had none of the give and take necessary. He must take all and give nothing. He would not allow even the smallest restriction on his liberty. Whatever the cost, he would always be master of himself. He took a room and left home. He visited his mother often, and now that he was not cheek by jowl with her he was more inclined to listen to her. During the daytime he worked with exceptional energy at his military duties. Most of the evenings he spent in the cafes, where he ate, or met the other conspirators in the back room of the Café Nogno, or in some private house with the doors locked and the shutters closed against the peering eyes of the police and their spies. There, drinking and smoking by the light of a candle or an oil lamp, they sat far into the night, talking and planning for the coming revolution. Mustafa Kemal attended the meetings, and remained in the organizations, but, as time went on, bit by bit he took a less active part. The leaders still would not let him into their inner circle. He would not be a subordinate. He must control or he would do nothing. He became more solitary and taciturn than ever. Chapter 7. Suddenly and without warning the revolution for which they were working burst around them. Niatsi, as impetuous and wild as ever, without rearranged plans had collected a few men, marched out of Lesne into the mountains of South Macedonia and defied the government. Enver at once published a proclamation of revolution and did the same in Eastern Macedonia. Nothing was prepared or organized. The Union and Progress itself had not more than 300 active members. The feeling of the troops was not known. Mustafa Kemal sat quiet, carrying on at his military duties. He was no foolish gambler to go plunging into a wild, unprepared adventure like this. If he acted it would be on a carefully considered scheme with some reasonable chance of success. But the wild adventure succeeded. The history of the next few months was like a fantastic dream and as confused. A few hundred rebels were out in the hills. Troops sent against them joined them. For years the soldiers had been neglected and UN-paid. Regiment after regiment, led by their officers, refused to act. Special troops sent over from the interior of Turkey did the same. To the amazement of all, and not the least of the committee itself, like leaves before the wind, the power of the Sultan was gone. With a quick decision, the old fox in Istanbul sidestepped, declared a constitutional government, blamed his advisers for all the misrule of the past, abolished espionage and welcomed the revolutionaries. Niyazi and Anwar marched back in triumph. Enthusiastic crowds of Christians and Turks, believing that the millennium had come, greeted them in Salonika. Mustafa Kemal, with other members of the committee who had taken no active part, met them. The new constitution was proclaimed by Anwar from the balcony of the Olympus Palace Hotel in the main square of Salonika. In the group of officers behind him stood Mustafa Kemal, unnoticed and unknown, except to a few, as one of the minor and insignificant members of the committee. At once, from every foreign country, came hurrying back the politicians whom Abdul Hamid had for 20 years exiled, princes, ex-grand viziers, ministers of all grades. They elbowed the young officers on one side, took control of the Committee of Union and Progress, and hurried to Constantinople to scramble and intrigue for power. Niyazi went back to Albania and was murdered. Anwar was posted as military attaché to Berlin. Mustafa Kemal was sent on a mission to North Africa to report on the garrisons in Tripoli. Confusion was piled on confusion. Everything went wrong. Austria annexed Bosnia and Herzegovina, Greece seized Crete, Bulgaria, backed by Russia, declared herself independent. Inside came reaction. There were revolts in Albania and Arabia. Christians and Muslims flew at each other. In the middle of all this confusion, the supporters of the old Sultan got to work. They bought over the soldiers in Constantinople, and sent out the priests and Hajjars to warn the people that the new rulers with their newfangled ideas from Paris were without religion. They were Jews and Freemasons, not Turks and Muslims. They intended to destroy Islam and the Caliphate. Roused to religious frenzy, the troops in Constantinople mutinied, killed or locked up their officers and, proclaiming their loyalty to the religion of Islam, to the Sultan and to the Caliph of the Faithful, seized Constantinople and chased out the committee. The committee appealed to the army in Macedonia for help. If they failed, Abdul Hamid and his cronies, with all their iniquities, would again be in power. The officer commanding in Macedonia was Mahmud Shawkat Pasha, an Arab who had been a favorite of Abdul Hamid, a tall, gaunt man, cadaverous as a eunuch in looks, as a staff officer brilliant, as a commander halting in decision. He hesitated what to do. On his staff were several of the committee, including Mustafa Kemal, who had just come back from Tripoli. Half against his own will, they jockeyed Mahmud Shawkat into action. He marched the Macedonian 2nd and 3rd armies to Constantinople. The advance guard consisted of the 1st Composite Division. In this, Anwar, who had hurried back from Berlin, commanded a cavalry detachment, and Mustafa Kemal was chief of the staff. They smashed the counter-revolution, deposed and locked up Abdul Hamid in the Villa Alatani in Salonika with Fatih the Macedonian to act as his jailer, placed his decrepit cousin on the throne and restored the committee to power. Among the committee, Anwar caught the public eye. He became the popular hero. He had raised the standard of revolt in Macedonia, and now he was leading the advance guard to complete that work. There was about Anwar a brilliance, a verve, a sparkling audacity, a flair for publicity, which made him stand out, while Mustafa Kemal, dull, sardonic and cautious, went unnoticed. He was unnoticed by the crowd and unwanted by the leaders. The committee had marked him down as a capable but unpleasant fellow who criticized everyone and would obey no one. A conceited, disgruntled man whom no one liked and who played a lone hand, without friends. They pushed him into the background and sent him back to soldiering.